And let me start by introducing myself. My name is Emilia Moreno Ruiz. I'm the Deputy Director of the ecoinvent Association, and I will be closing this beginner's guide cycle that we have done of 3 webinars by talking about the system models today. So just to start with a bit the structure of the webinar. This webinar is the final one in this series for beginners. I will be referring to the previous one. Of course, there's no obligation for you to have attended those, but this builds a bit on the information that was given in those. The idea today of the webinar is to refresh quickly in the beginning the database structure and then dive into the ecoinvent system models before in the beginning or first a bit in general and then diving a bit into the different system models, cutoff, APOS, and consequential. So let's start a bit in setting again the basis here. The ecoinvent database is developed, it's also maintained in the form of those building blocks that are shown in this scheme, which are uniprocesses. They are uniprocesses that represent multi-output, unallocated, and unlinked activities, and also markets. So you can imagine this starting point, this database, as a collection of those markets and transforming activities, like you should have seen in the previous webinars. Those uniprocesses are created and maintained in a form where they are representing the reality. They model reality in the sense that they model inputs and outputs. Wastes are modeled on the output side. They might have, as I just said, several co-products, if that's of course appropriated, and they list entries of inputs not linking to the different suppliers unless, of course, a direct link has been established. This is called the undefined database. This is a database that it's only accessible in ecoquery. ecoquery, you should have seen also, it's the portal of accessing the ecoinvent database through the ecoinvent webpage. And this access to the undefined database is free and granted to anyone that has identified him or herself. This version, this undefined version, can be used to, for example, understand the modeling behind each activity, understand the choices that were taken by the data provider, balances, mass, carbon, water balances, etc. This collection of small building blocks is the one that it's used to build system models. The first thing before when building a system model is to connect the different activities, generate supply chains, and calculate the database. So the different individual elements are connected to calculate a linked database. That's where value chains are connected, and then using that information, LCI and LCIA can be calculated from a starting point was those uniprocesses, those building blocks. And let's explore a bit how supply chains get connected. How do we connect those different building blocks? It's important to remember that the supply chains, they link together using as a central point the geographical boundaries of markets. So in the database, there will exist always at least one global market per product, but also regional markets would exist for different products. And the linking of supply chains of products will be organized, will pivot around the markets, around their geographical localization. So the markets will be supplied by producers of that same product. So they're presenting different technologies, for example. And those producers are within this geographical boundary that the market has set. And similarly, the activities consuming this product delivered by the market will be in the same geographical coverage that the market is setting. It's of course also possible to have direct links from producers to consumers that will be then used to represent supply of a specific product to a specific consuming activity instead of being supplied by the consumption mixes. Especially as users of the activity of the database for your foreground system, you will always have the choice to decide whether you want to use the supply from the market, which is representing the mix, the consumption mix available in the geographical boundary you're interested in, or whether you want to link directly to a specific supplier that is producing the product using a technology, specific technology, for example. Just remember, when you're using a specific supplier, information like transport of the product to your activity, to your plant, or losses will need to be covered with information that you would need to add to your activity. So the database will then be calculated from undefined, from these building blocks that we have seen, will be calculated into 3 system models. For that, as we are going to see first with the scheme, 3 different algorithms will be used. They will be reflecting different modeling options. There will be describing 3 different ways of assembling the value chains. And this is because 3 ways of answering to specific questions are going to be used for the algorithms. So it is important to understand the difference between the modeling choices behind the system models, because the different system models are going to deliver different results. So it's important to understand the differences between system models in order to choose between one or another, depending on the requirements of your study, and obtain then the more relevant and consistent results. So those are the 3 system models that you can read in the slide: allocation, cutoff by classification, allocation, APOS, substitution, consequential, long-term. And let's represent with a scheme how everything is constructed, and everything is based on the same undefined database, on this same collection of unlinked multi-output uniprocesses. On that, there are linking rules, 3 sets of linking rules that are applied. Linking rules, you can imagine that as a collection of rules that will allow to calculate different versions of the database. And as I was saying, different modeling choices are used in those linking rules. And what are they answering? What questions are being answered in those rules? For example, how to solve multifunctionality, how to solve the question of activities producing more than one product, how to treat recycling and the waste streams, and how to handle constraint in suppliers. So typically those are the questions that will be answered differently in one set of linking rules than in another's. So those linking rules are coded into linking algorithms that will allow then the calculation of linked uniprocesses, so linked supply chains, that will then be calculated into LCI and LCIA. And each collection of results from the linked uniprocesses, the linked value chains, to the LCI data and LCIA results, all the collection of results, each of them is called a system model. So let's explore a bit more in depth what are the differences between the different system models, and let's start with the first one, which is the way byproducts are handled, the way the system models solve the problem of multifunctionality of one activity that produces more than one product. And this is handled in two ways. In the system models called allocation, so allocation cutoff by classification or allocation APOS, this is solved by using the attributional approach, by using allocation, by using partitioning and or division or sharing of burdens. The burdens are shared, they are partitioned between the different co-products that are in the activity to solve this multifunctionality. For that, there is allocation factors that are used. Allocation in the database is structured following the ISO 1440 and 44 hierarchy. So that means that as much as we can, when a complex system is modeled is present in the database, we will try to solve it by subdivision of the system. So by avoiding the creation of the multifunctionality and dividing the system. When this is not possible, we will use physical relationships when they are meaningful, like in the case of using exergy to allocate between heat and electricity in cogeneration, for example. Otherwise, and more generally, we use economic allocation in the database, so the price. Maybe a nice tip that it's probably redundant with information you have seen in the other webinars for this beginner cycle. Allocation factors can be found easily in the database when this is looked in the ecoquery. This is a screenshot of the ecoinvent database accessed in the ecoquery or through the ecoquery. If you we are looking here at the allocated version of the activity tuna capture by purse seiner and landing hole frozen. So if you see here, there are two products issued from this activity: small pelagic fish fresh and landed tuna frozen. And the allocation is done between those two products. In the category true value, you can find a representation of the allocation factors that are calculated in this case using the price. So you can see that 96% will go to the tuna and 4% will go to the small pelagic fish. You can calculate 96 and 4% by using those two absolute numbers here in the screenshot. The other approach that can be used to solve multifunctionality is substitution. So substitution is the approach used by the system model substitution consequential long-term. And in the substitution approach, the activity, the reference product of the activity will be burdened with the full impacts of the activity, and it will be credited with the benefits for the byproducts that are produced in the same activity and can substitute other production routes. Maybe let's look at an example. If we use this somehow simplified example of a gold mine operation that will produce gold as a reference product and silver as a byproduct, in the consequential, what this will mean is that silver extracted as a byproduct will be crediting the gold for the avoided impacts on the extraction of a silver in a, for example, dedicated silver mine. Okay, another difference between the system models relate to the way burdens for waste treatment are considered. Are the burdens carried fully by the producer? Are they shared? So two system models will give full responsibility to the producer of the waste. Those are allocation, cut-off by classification, and substitution consequential long-term. The exception here are recyclable materials that will be burden-free in the case of allocation cut-off by classification. In the case of APOS, the burdens associated to the treatment of the waste will be shared between all possible valuable products generating within the value chain. We look here at this small scheme where we represent manufacturing of product A and treatment of waste. One can imagine that the treatment of waste will have a valuable product generated together with the treatment of the waste. There's a small system expansion that will be done in order to allocate together the product A, whose manufacturing has generated the waste, and any valuable product that is produced while treating the waste. So allocation will happen at this level. So in the end, the burdens of treating a waste will be shared between the producer of the waste and eventually other activities in the value chain that are making use of useful products obtained from treating the waste. The third difference between system models refers to the way consumption mixes are supplied. In the case of the attributional system models, so allocation cut-off by classification and allocation APOS, all suppliers are supplying the market, the consumption mix. In the case of the substitution consequential long-term system model, only the suppliers that can adapt to changes in the demand from the market can supply that market. Those are called the marginal or the unconstrained suppliers, and we are going to talk more about them and about constraint in consequential when we will go to details of the consequential system model. The result of this difference in supply is that the market composition will be different in the attributional approach than in the consequential approach. If you look here at this very simplified scheme, you can see that the supply to the same market, it's not the same in one kind of system models than in the other. And I can now maybe stop and take some questions. There were some questions posted about the difference between water content and water in wet mass. This is difference in properties. Properties are given to all products with mass in the database, dry mass, water in wet mass, and also carbon content and so. Water in wet mass refers to the part of water that can be found in the overall wet mass of a product, and this addition to dry mass should equal to the wet mass. Water content is the water in the dry mass of a product, so it's a percentage. Someone wanted to understand when to use market activities emission factors or transforming activities emission factors. For example, if system boundaries are defined as cradle to gate and raw materials acquisition emissions for a specific product need to be calculated. That's a very good question. If you want to use a product as an input for your process, the question that you need to ask to yourself is, do I want to take it with already the default transport estimation and losses? Do I want to take it from the market, considering already the technology mix, etc.? Or do I want to take a specific input at the gate or a specific manufacturing facility? And if I want to take it at the gate, of a specific manufacturing facility, then I need to model everything, the transport and the losses and everything. And in that case, you just need to connect those directly. There is another question about if PDFs would show not only the CO2 emissions, but also impacts according to IPCC. Yes, they do. You just have to make sure to download PDF from allocated, or I mean from the system models, from the calculated system models, consequential or attributional, and then you will be able to see also impacts in those PDFs. And there are questions about consequential model. I will talk about consequential later, so I will see if the question is already answered at that point. Otherwise, I will use again the gold and silver example to talk more about this. Okay, so maybe let's move on to allocation cutoff by classification system model. This first system model is the one that we would advise for beginners, and the ones that we would advise for people used to work with version 2 and wanting to continue in the same line of thought and modeling. So the cutoff in this system model happens not because there are cutoff in the inventory, but because the products are classified, and depending on their classification, they are allocated differently, depending on that. The classification that is given to the products puts them in 3 categories: allocatable, waste, and recyclable materials. This classification will determine how the byproduct is allocated in the system model, so it will determine the results obtained with the product. This classification is given by the author of the dataset and ecoinvent together, and it's of course reviewed by the editor and follows the regular review, because it determines the results that will be obtained. So as I was saying, if we imagine an activity that has a product A and then 3 byproducts that are classified, one as allocatable, one as waste, and one as recyclable material, let's see how each of them would behave. Let's start with allocatable. This is covering most of the product in the database. 90% of the products in the database will be classified as allocatable, can be thought as commercially valuable byproducts. They are allocated against the reference product using the different allocation factors as we have seen in the introduction in the beginning. If we now think of wastes they represent around 8% of the products in the database. Those should be materials with no economic value, materials where the producer is generally paying to dispose of those materials, and so what the producer of that waste is in the end consuming is the service of disposing of the material. So in this case, the activity will get the burdens of treating them, and maybe we can see a bit further. The activity will get the full burdens of treating that waste, of disposing of that waste, but any valuable byproduct produced out of the treatment activity will be delivered burden-free. There's here a point of cutoff. That's why the name cutoff in the system model. The cutoff is here. This product is then being supplied burden-free, but it's not giving credits to the system. It's not decreasing the impact of treating the waste. It's simply available burden-free, can be used burden-free as an input to other activities downstream in the value chain. The recyclable materials, which correspond to around 3% of the products in the database, those are material which can serve as input, as the resource for a recycling activity. There is an interest in their collection. This is a product like metal scrap or paper or waste paper or things like that. They will be also modeled as negative inputs, same as the wastes, but they will be cut off from their producing activities. They will be delivered burden-free to the activities that it's disposing of those recyclable materials, that has produced those recyclable materials through the creation of this recycled content cutoff activity, which is an empty activity and it's burden-free. The use of those recyclable materials as an input for a recycling activity downstream or in the value chain, it's also free. They are provided burden-free to demanding activities through this same burden-free cutoff, recycled content cutoff activity. Any and again here that it's a point of cutoff as marked here in green. In the case of recycling chains, this cutoff, this point of cutoff is happening in the first step of the chain. That's where the point of cutoff will be set. So just to summarize, the cutoff system model is separating primary and secondary use phases. The burdens of the primary production will stay with the first use of the product, and because of the cutoff, will not go downstream to the secondary use to the secondary use. The use of secondary materials then is incentivized because there's no burden given for a recyclable material. If we look at this example of a primary production of aluminium versus secondary production of aluminium using the mining route as primary production or the scrap as the secondary production. The secondary material is incentivized. Scrap will be given delivered for free, but there is no credit given for useful products. For example, in waste treatments, in the waste treatment, full burdens were given to the waste producers as a reminder. So as a consequence, there's an encouragement to use recycled products, but there's not an encouragement towards waste treatments which might produce beneficial products, towards improving the technology around waste treatments. Okay, so there is no okay, there was a question between waste and recyclable material. So as I was saying, classifying a product as a waste or as a recyclable material is something that will be deciding by looking at the specificities of the products and the possible downstream activities that could use that product. Is this product, has it a value and it's then reused in activities that can be considered as recycling activities, or is this product at the end of life and it's treated as a waste, for example, by incineration, by landfilling, and by other technologies that are considered waste treatments. Okay, maybe then we can move to the next system model, which is allocation at the point of substitution system model. In this system model, there is, as I was saying in the introduction, a small system expansion that will be done, and the impact of the activity that generates a waste that needs to be treated, and the impact of the activity of treating that waste will be considered together and shared between all commercial products that will appear in the value chain. So if you can see here in the example, this is a production activity, which is the blue one producing the product A, and the treatment activity, which is the red one. The impacts of both will be considered together and shared between the product A, which is the manufactured product in the production activity, and product E, which is another commercially valuable product issued of the treatment of the waste. The value chain can contain a treatment chain, potentially several commercial byproducts. We can imagine several more like the product E, and impact will be allocated within all those products. So in APOS, the waste producers will have this incentivization to assess recycling, reuse, treatment possibilities in order to generate more valuable, interesting products in the value chain, and then distribute impacts within the value chain using those products. Okay, let's look at an example, a simplified example. If we are looking here at the paper manufacturing, which produces municipal solid waste. Municipal solid waste will be disposed and treated with municipal solid waste incineration. And municipal solid waste incineration generates heat, also electricity, but this is a simplified example. I'm just considering a few elements. So first, allocation will happen at the point of substitution. The point of substitution is describing setting the boundary of the system. The boundary of the system will be drawn like this. This is the point where the first commercially valuable product appears in the supply chain. That's the point of substitution. That's where where allocation is going to happen. How is it going to happen? I was saying this is a system expansion, so heat will be considered in the paper manufacturing, and heat will be allocated against paper in the paper manufacturing, generating two activities: paper manufacturing producing heat and paper manufacturing producing paper. Allocation here happens using the same considerations as I mentioned in the introduction, using physical properties like exergy in the case of cogeneration, using price in most of the other cases. In APOS, in the database, we will have a lot of activities generating municipal solid waste. So this heat produced after the incineration of municipal solid waste can be allocated against a variety of products in different activities. So in the end, we will not provide all those data sets like here, paper manufacturing generating heat in all the cases, because it will be a lot of individual activities. We will aggregate them all with a weighted aggregation, of course, and rename this back to heat produced out of municipal solid waste incineration. Those data sets you will find in APOS. They might be hard to read. They might contain a lot of information, hundreds of inputs and outputs representing a lot of diverse supply chains. If you think of all the supply chains where municipal solid waste could be involved. So to summarize very quickly, in APOS, waste producers will be incentivized to assess recycling and reuse possibilities due to this partial allocation of impacts of useful products through the value chain. On the other hand, the use of secondary materials is not incentivized per se. Okay, let me see if there are things we can take now here. Okay. Okay, there is still some questioning when to use cutoff, when to use APOS. I will go also back later to when to use one or when to use the other. What it's clear it has to be clear for you. It's also what is the question that your study is asking, because depending on where is the focus of your study, you will choose cutoff or APOS or consequential, and that decision in fine is yours. What it's important to remember is that, except if we are comparing just cutoff and APOS for now, results will not differ so much between those two system models, except if we look at waste treatment and recycling possibilities. There, results may vary. So one option also is to use cutoff for example, in a study, and APOS in the case as a sensitivity analysis for assessing specific parts of the study. Let me see. Okay. There are questions about consequential. I will take them with the consequential if it's okay. I think that someone asking if one wants to show the potential benefits and differences of different recycling techniques for a specific product, which system model would be recommended. First of all, if the study, the focus of the study and the main goal of the study is to assess the relevance of two specific or distinguish between two specific technologies, those become immediately the foreground system. So those become immediately the place where you as user and as practitioners would need to add primary data for your foreground system. But if in your background system there is the need of assessing better recycling and waste impacts overall in the value chains, then APOS and cutoff, as I was saying, can be combined to give proper value and on the study, to the study. Okay, we can move then forward and start the final system model, substitution, consequential, long-term. So in this system model, substitution, as has been mentioned, is used to solve multifunctionality. The byproducts are constraints. They are modeled as a negative input, as we have seen, and therefore they are not available to supply activities. That means that many data sets that exist in the allocation, in the attributional system models, will not exist in the consequential model. If we use our silver and gold example, silver extracted from a gold mine will not exist in the consequential system model, because silver is modeled as a negative input to the gold mine operation delivering gold. And how are unconstrained suppliers determined in the consequential system model? What are the characteristics that are considered when deciding which are the marginal suppliers for a market? So there are two types of constraints that will be set, two types of constraints that will be used for them to determine marginal suppliers. First is the constraint of byproducts. As I was saying, byproducts are always constrained. And the other one is constraints due to technology. And maybe let's start with constraints due to the fact of being a byproduct. First of all, let's see how do you see byproducts in the consequential system model. This is a screenshot from a PDF. And if you look here, you will see the reference product. This is the activity with production organic. You see the reference product is wheat grain organic, and you see here in the inputs from Technosphere, and those are credits for byproducts. You will see it's straw, and it's giving credits because of the substitution of primary production of straw. If we use another example to explore further the constraint of byproducts, we are looking at the production of meat. The production of meat is constrained in the case when, or meat is constrained when it is produced as a byproduct of wool. That means that the wool supplier will not be reacting to changes in demand in the market for meat. And if the market for meat and the consumers of meat would demand more meat, the wool producer will not be able to react to that. Only the wool producer will be only able to react to changes in demand of wool, which is its reference product. The activity that will be able to react to changes in the demand of meat will be the meat producer. That's the one that's producing meat as the reference product. That's the one we say it's unconstrained. That's a marginal supplier, and it can react to changes in the demand of meat. So that means that the meat producer is the only supplier to the meat market. And as I said, is the only one that can react to changes in the demand of meat. The meat byproduct is constrained, so it will be as a negative input, and it will be giving credits to the wool producer, modeling the avoided impacts of meat production, so creating a demand for primary production of meat. So here, as you can picture, the market for meat will look different here than in attributional, because in attributional, the market for meat will also have the supply of the meat coming from the wool producer. The other constraint that it's set in the database is due to technology. This is another aspect of marginal suppliers. The marginal suppliers have the capacity to adapt to the political or the regulatory or the economic landscape, and to supply the product as the demand grows in a growing market. And this is done through the technology level, which is the tag that it's set on the different technologies to label which are those able to adapt and provide additional capacity in a growing demand. And those are the levels here: new, modern as the most competitive technology, current, which is in between, and old as the least competitive technology. So if we look at how the technologies are used to set the marginal supplier, technologies like modern or new will be identified as unconstrained in growing markets, and then will be chosen as the marginal suppliers. So that's how the technology tag affects how a supplier is considered marginal or not. If we look to an example, which can be electricity production in France, so the supply to the market for electricity production in France, we can see here a simplification with just 3 technologies, a nuclear and hydro run-of-river being considered modern, and natural gas production, electricity production with natural gas being considered as current. So in the attributional system model, just as a reminder, all technologies will contribute to the market with their relative production volumes. In the consequential, only the marginal suppliers, so in this case, only the 2 technologies that are considered modern, that are considered capable or adapting their capacities and adding capacities in a growing market, will be contributing to the market. So the market composition, again, will be different in the consequential than in the attributional system models. Just to wrap up a bit the consequential system model. So in this system model, substitution is used to solve multifunctionality. You will only see the activity producing the reference product, the main product, and byproducts will be modeled as inputs to that, giving credits to that. In the consequential model, then only unconstrained suppliers are taken into account. And if all suppliers are constrained, then constrained markets are used. In that case, substitution is applied by reducing the use of this product elsewhere, in which would be called the marginal consumption activity. So constraints in ecoinvent are often model-based on basic information. There are, for example, in the energy sector, a paper reporting on the considerations that have been taken in order to consider given technologies in given geographies as modern or current. So that's a paper which I recommend, of course, to read if this is of relevance for you. And in any case, the foreground system should show more specificity. So there's always a detailed look that has to be given to foreground system in order to ensure that we are really considering the value chains which are important for the foreground system in the proper way. Okay, and exactly that is a question that we have received. If we model the foreground in a consequential manner, the background should be necessarily consequential. Exactly. Yes, I would say that would be the thing to do. And also, are there limitations modeling on the consequential database? What are the underlying assumptions, and where are adjustment needed when modeling with the consequential database? So, as I just said, foreground systems will always need dedicated attention. So you would need to check where are the main contributors for your foreground system and study how those main contributors are modeled in the consequential system model. As I said, in, for example, the case of electricity, you can find a whole dedicated paper accessible in our webpage. Other sectors will have information in reports or eventually in the datasets, but there's always a dedicated, thorough look after identifying what are the value chains relevant for your foreground system, of course. Okay, good. So then I would, wrap up a bit with some considerations on how to discriminate between system models, maybe some ideas on when to use what. Again, first of all, you are the one that knows your study, so you are the one, practitioners, that know what do you need. So the decision of which system model to use should in the end come from you. Another important consideration, please don't mix system models. That's an important thing to say. You have to use one system model for one study. Of course, you can use another different system model for a different study, but please don't mix system models within the same study, because that doesn't make sense. Okay, and then let's maybe bring back some considerations on the different system models, and that would also help wrapping up the webinar. So the cutoff system model is separating primary and secondary use stages. This approach is incentivizing the use of secondary materials. So that's the approach that you would be using if you are choosing the cutoff system model. You will be incentivizing the use of secondary materials, and you will not be taking into account whether the treatment of the waste materials in the system are being done with an approach that maximize the reuse of waste materials, or with maybe innovative technologies that are contributing with new products to the value chain. If you're using APOS, on the other hand, you are somehow considering that the waste producers are incentivized to assess recycling and reuse because of this partial allocation of the impacts within the useful products in the value chain. So, as I said before, APOS can be used in studies where the question of waste disposal method is a topic, or as a counterpoint to the cutoff model in a sensitivity analysis. And again, making a clear distinction of what belongs to the background and what belongs to the foreground. And if the question of the disposal method and the recycling activity is following in the foreground considerations, then there is primary data that you might need to gather as well. The consequential system model shall be used as a background database when performing consequential lifecycle assessment. Yes, we have also been answering to that question before. This modeling is assessing changes. The system model is looking at the consequences of small-scale, long-term decisions. It's taking into account constraints that will be applicable at this scale and this time horizon. So the use of substitution will have big effects on the results of productions with significant byproducts. Because, as you have seen, byproducts will be modeled as a negative input. So modeling of byproducts will create a demand for primary production in consequential. And this, in this case, the activities where byproducts are consequent and important amount, the results will be quite different in consequential. And the consequential is using, of course, marginal suppliers. This might be an improvement in some cases where eventually the more modern and new technologies are less impactful, but it can also be that new or modern technologies are more impactful than the average suppliers. But it's another consideration that has to be done, and another difference that will bring differences to results in the end. Okay, let's see if there are more questions that I can take. We have still something like 3 minutes. Okay. Okay, I have a question regarding LCIA results. We can see in EcoQuery, what do the results show in the PDF? So is it linking in process or system process? I was trying to answer also to a similar question before. You can download PDFs from uniprocesses, also from undefined, from linked uniprocesses, and also from LCI. And when you download PDF from linked uniprocesses from the different system models, they will also contain LCIA results. They will contain contribution of each flow to different impact assessments, just a selection of impact assessments, and they will be shown in the PDF. Let me see if I can see new questions. In consequential systems, are the credits for the byproducts calculated using an allocation approach or another method? No, the credits for the byproducts will be calculated using the relative impact of the primary production that this byproduct is somehow displacing. So in the case of gold and silver, the silver negative input to the gold mine operation will be getting credits for the silver mine operation that it's being displaced for this primary production that wouldn't need to happen because of this silver produced at the same time as the gold. Okay, let's see more. Yeah, that I have answered. Okay. I don't see new questions coming. Okay, and wait, it's 5, almost. Okay, I don't see more questions coming here. Can we create new flows, and does the system take them into account in the calculation when you are creating new flows? I guess in your LCA software, you would need to introduce them or create them within the context of eventually an activity. and you would need to link different inputs. You need to connect the different inputs or the different flows to suppliers from the background database eventually. And by connecting them, you will in the end create an activity which is then in your foreground system that is connected to the background database. Because it's connected to the background database, you will be able to calculate it and then obtain results out of this new activity or out of and for this new product that you would have created. Okay. And okay, I think we can maybe stop here. I don't see more questions coming. Here, I think that I have, I hope I have answered to all questions as far I can see here in the question box. And I thank you all very much for your participation. There were a lot of questions posted here, so that's always very nice. And I just wish you a very nice day or a very nice evening, depending on where are you located. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.